In lesson 25, we're going to enter into triangle congruence proofs. And before we get into congruent proofs, I want to talk about corresponding sides and angles, corresponding parts of triangles. We have sides and angles. All right, let's really get to know these triangles here. So in example 1, it gives us XYZ and KML, those two triangles. And it wants us to identify corresponding parts. Well, what I would first do is I would flip this triangle. You can probably see the example in the book has a better drawing. Mine's kind of scattered. But it looks like this at the start. What it would probably be easiest to do is go ahead and flip it to look like this. K, L would now be up here, and M. And now, if I see it that way, to me, I see this better, and I can see what corresponds easier than what I had on the bottom. So now I can label my corresponding parts. We have X, angle X is corresponding to K. Angle Y corresponding to L. I'll try to do this fast because I think you'll get the idea. Z to M. And now we did all the sides, angles. Now we're going to do the sides. So XZ, side XZ corresponds to KM. Side XY corresponds to KL. And then the last one is YZ corresponds to LM. So those are corresponding parts in the triangles. Now, when let's say we knew all the corresponding parts to be congruent. Well, the whole triangle can be said to are said to be congruent when the angles and sides are congruent. Okay? So looking back here, I'm going back and forth. If we knew that all this was congruent to each other, even the sides, therefore these two triangles would be congruent. But there's actually a few shortcuts that we're going to talk about. Let's say we had triangles that had three sides that were congruent. A and B is congruent to DE, EF congruent to BC, and AC congruent to DF. All the sides are congruent. Well, what we can say is that it has side, side, side correspondence, or whatever you want to say. Or congruence, that's the word I'm looking for. Side, side, side congruence. And when we know, so if we know that all three sides are congruent, this, what this stands for, CPCTC, it stands for corresponding parts of congruent, bring this down, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Now, it's very basic, but because we know side, side, side congruence theorem, now we can assume angle B is congruent to angle E because of CPCTC. We can assume C is congruent to F and D is congruent to A because corresponding parts are congruent. We already know the triangles are congruent from SSS. Now we just did the corresponding angles as to be congruent because of our knowledge that the triangles are congruent. So I kind of described that in a long fashion, but hopefully that makes sense. It's a simple concept, but sometimes these simple concepts can be harder to understand or hard to explain. So hopefully you understood that side, side, side correspondence, and there's going to be other angle correspondence postulates that we're going to use in the future, but that's just an intro to triangle correspondent postulates.